Welcome everyone, and welcome to this presentation of Oregon Area Historical Society Presents. I'm Kara Ripley, the Adult Services Librarian at the Oregon Public Library. And first up is Dina, who will be talking about the Berry Stables.
Hi, thank you so much for having us, Kara. I'm Dina Zentner, and I'm going to be talking about the Berry Stables. At the end of my presentation, you're welcome to ask me questions about the Berry Stables or about horses in general. I'll be glad to try to answer your questions or get the answers for you. So have you ever wondered why Oregon is known far and wide, horse capital of Wisconsin? When it comes to horses, Phil, Mike, and Pat of the Berry family could easily be considered our state's first horse family. Beginning with Garrett Berry in 1870, Berry Stables is the oldest horse establishment in Wisconsin and encompasses 5 generations of the Berry family. Nationally known for champion horse breeding and professional training, Berry Stables was located just outside of Oregon, west on Highway M. The nationally known stables won many championship trophies throughout the years in various competitions. The Berry Stables were the boarding home of horse lovers. The nearby attractive Underwood subdivision was also developed by the family. All roads in the area are fondly named after horse references, such as Paddock Place and Derby Winners. The Berry's history with horses goes 1870, 151 years ago, when the Berries raced around Belgium. These particular breeds of horses are known for their great power and strength. Percherons are the biggest horse breeds, and they, along with all draft horses, are known as cold-blooded. This term typically refers to the fact that they are a calm and docile breed of horse. And I bet you can guess what these horses were historically used for. Before farms became mechanized, draft horses were used for farm and field. As you can see, the workhorses were large-bodied, exceptionally muscular, and were able to do heavy work by pulling farm equipment. Most often, they were driven in pairs or teams, requiring skill and precision in their performance. Back when the Berry farm was established, and well into the 1900s, the farm was operated using 8 teams of draft horses. The farm then consisted of 320 acres. Pictured here is George Berry with his well-bred team of Belgian horses. This is Dan and Topsy. They stand 17 hands high, and as a team, they weigh around 4,000 pounds. The Berry family was later inspired to raise a quite different breed of horse called saddlebreds. What are saddlebreds, and how do they differ from the working draft horse breeds? The saddlebred, as you can see here, is widely considered the ultimate of show horses. It has a sleek, elegant appearance and is a gaited high stepper. A gaited horse moves each leg independently. Doing so allows one foot to constantly be on the ground, allowing the horse to conserve more energy than it would while trotting. Gaited horses offer a smooth ride and have great stamina and endurance. Saddlebreds are lighter weight horses used for riding and showing pleasure. The story story of how the Berries came to have saddlebreds is really fascinating. A nephew in the Berry family was a medical doctor. For payment of an emergency surgery, the grateful patient gave the doctor 2 quality saddlebreds. These horses soon found their home at Berry Stables and were later taken to Kentucky to be bred with the famous saddlebred stallion, Bourbon King, one of the most influential bloodlines in saddlebreds. Bourbon King was foaled in 1900. He was a chestnut stallion with a star and white cornets on his hind feet. And Bourbon King lived to be 30 years old. A news article printed in 1999 shares the following comments made by Michael Berry. What are the steps you take in training a horse? And when do you know the training is complete? Here is how Michael, as you can see, Michael in the photograph, answered that question. We begin training a horse when it reaches 2 years of age. First, we work them on the ground with a halter and bridle. When they are comfortable wearing the equipment, we break them to drive with a cart. When they are about 2.5 years old, we break them to ride. At that time, we can assess their potential and determine what category of show will best fit them. For example, will they just be a pleasure horse for casual everyday riding, or do they have the high stepping action to be a 3-gaited or 5-gaited horse? Here is how Michael answered the question. When do you know when the training is complete? Would anyone here watching like to venture a guess to this question? When do you know the training is complete? You may put your answer in chat. I bet if there's any horse people here tonight watching, they will know the answer to this. Training a horse is never complete. Never. Like an athlete, it is important to keep a horse in training to attain its highest level of performance. So how many of you knew that? Pictured next are many horses partaking in an Oregon parade. It's commendable to see the collaborative effort of this group of horses. In this picture, it was a 32-degree day in December when approximately 60 horses walked 2 miles through downtown Oregon to promote the proud designation of Horse Capital of Wisconsin. Don't horses always seem to be attendees' favorites? I know they are mine. While it all looks like fun, immense time and training goes into preparing horses for the parade atmosphere. Horses need to go through desensitizing training. Think about all of the unfamiliar sights and sounds horses experience along the parade route. There's blaring sirens, floating balloons, cheering crowds, marching bands, and waving flags. Excitement abounds everywhere, and the horses need to know what to expect so not to be frightened or spooked. The Horse Capital of Wisconsin designation can be credited to our local newspaper, the Oregon Observer. Back in the mid-1950s, the Oregon Observer held a contest to come up with a name to promote the then small town Oregon. The Oregon Observer awarded the late Eleanor Killerlane with $25 for her winning slogan, Horse Capital of Wisconsin. Designation was then quickly registered with the state. At that time, there were at least 50 horse operations within a 5-mile radius of Oregon. I invite you to take a drive through our rural roads in Oregon today. There, you will continue to see the horse presence generated and honored for many decades by the Berry family. And the next time you are in Oregon, look at this welcome sign located off Highways 14 and 138. Notice the grand, proud saddlebred there. Now you know why it is pictured there and what it represents in Oregon's history. Does anyone have any questions that perhaps I could answer? You may ask your questions and chat or unmute yourself, and I or another member of our Historical Society will do our best to answer questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
My question is there still a standard bred breeder in Oregon anywhere?
That's a very good question. And I am familiar with several breeding stables, and I would venture to say yes. I can't confirm that, but there's several very highly rated stables. One is Horse First, and then there is another one equally as well known. And I'd be glad to call and find out for you if you would like to know that answer. That's a very good question. It would be nice to think so that tradition could be continued in our area. Maybe there would be some descendants even of Bourbon King or some relatives there of his.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Might be relatives.
Tell you what, I will call 2 stables that I know of and have visited myself and see if I can find that answer out for you. Because I would think with saddlebreds being the ultimate show horse and a favorite, all-time favorite, that there should be. I would hope so, but I will find out.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking. You'll have to leave your number with Kara so we can get back to you on that. Are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to our next presenter.
Thanks, Dina. You're going to
Thank
be a
you.
hard act to follow. Good evening, and thank you for signing into our presentation. I will be talking about 2 women from Oregon who served in World War II. Women from the Oregon area served in the war in different capacities. Many helped on the home front, either by going to work to replace the men who had left for war, or by assisting the Red Cross making judicious use of ration coupons, and so many other jobs women were either asked or expected to do. The 2 women I'm going to talk about tonight are Eunice Onsrud and Peg Kellogg. Eunice Onsrud grew up on a farm 3 miles south of Oregon on Highway 14. She was the oldest of several children. In 1995, she gave a presentation to the Women's Club of Towson, Maryland, and since she knew her story better than I ever can, I am going to tell her story in her voice. I have had to shorten it some. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was created to relieve men from non-combat jobs. The bill was finally signed by President Roosevelt on May 14, 1942. On January 24, 1943, I reported to Fort Des Moines, Iowa for basic training. KP duty, marching, drills, calisthenics, barracks, and personal inspections, immunization, issuance of clothing and equipment, and on and on. Then I trained at a few other bases and eventually was assigned overseas. And on July 29th, we sailed on the SS Empress of Scotland for a 9-day trip across the water. We landed in Casablanca, Morocco. We stayed there 3 days, and this was our introduction to tent living. We were assigned to the 5th Army. We were in the headquarters division. We were interviewed and assigned our positions. I was assigned as a clerk typist and later a clerk stenographer in the Quartermaster Corps. I worked for several colonels and majors. One of the girls was assigned as a secretary to the commanding general of the 5th Army, General Mark Clark. We spent some time living in Mostegem, Algeria. We learned that there was a great difference between French and Arabian cultures. While stationed there, the WAAC became the Women's Army Corps. We were now soldiers in the Army with the same pay and benefit as the other non-combat soldiers. Combat troops of the 5th Army went ashore in Salerno, Italy on September 9, 1943, thus becoming the first American force to break an opening into the German fortress Europe. Of all the field armies, the 5th Army spent the longest continuous period in action against the enemy. For 20 months, it fought in Italy against a wily enemy, against rocky mountainous terrain, and against the miseries of cold and snow in its winter offensives. On November 11th, 2 days before we were to ship out, we saw a huge convoy off Mostaganem, and that evening it was attacked by planes. 2 ships were blown up. When we left, we knew the same could happen to us. We sailed on a 3-day voyage to Naples. Upon arrival, due to the number of destroyed ships in the bay, we were unable to pull all the way into the harbor. Thus, we saw our first real scenes of war. Naples, the second largest port in Italy, was a mass of crumbled stone and twisted steel. The city was captured just 5 weeks before we arrived. Scenes of great destruction would be repeated as we followed the combat troops up the boot of Italy. In January 1944, our platoon was split. The forward echelon, communications, moved out to a bivouac area near Pranzano. The rear echelon would follow in March. Thus began the echelons leapfrogging up the spine of Italy with stays as short as a week. The tents were 5 girls to a tent, a small stove in the middle, plus all our gear. Dirt floor, sometimes gravel, sometimes boards. Our offices were also in tents. For the most part, we all enjoyed the outdoor life. Oh, there were drawbacks: mosquitoes, bugs, spiders, mice, and snakes. One morning when I put my shoes on, I discovered a green snake in one of them. I shook it out and kept going. The 5th Army started a big push at the end of May 1944, which resulted in our platoon moving nearer the front lines. On June 4th, the forward echelon moved near Rome. Rome fell on June 4th. On June 5th, General Clark and the 5th Army troops traveled through the streets of the Eternal City amid cheering and throngs of people. The rear echelon traveled to Naples. There we boarded an LST, a landing ship tank, for an overnight trip to the famous Anzio beachhead. This was the first time in military history that the members of the WAC had traveled by any of the famed landing craft. We were met by a battery of newsmen and cameras. We finally found our bivouac area on a hill overlooking the harbor, set up tents, unpacked, and resumed our work at the headquarters offices. We had witnessed other bombing raids and had risked being torpedoed while on ships. Now we were closer to the front lines. Nazis were still bombing the harbor nearly every night, so we spent a lot of time in dugouts. When we were awakened by warning sirens, we climbed out of our cots beneath the mosquito nets, donned our helmets, grabbed our gas masks, and ran for the dugout. Crammed ourselves in and waited for the all-clear siren. One night, I got a surprise shower when I put my helmet on, forgetting I had used it as a bowl to wash clothes earlier. I remember one girl slept in the nude and she would wrap herself in a blanket on the way to the dugout. One bomb exploded near our headquarters. One of the girls found a piece of shrapnel in her bed when she returned from the office. Several of us went to a military burial service for one of the servicemen at the Anzio Nettuno cemetery. That cemetery was a field of white crosses as far as the eye could see. On April 29, we were again on the move. It was a 7-hour rough ride through the Apennines. On the way, we passed truck after truckload of German sold prisoners. We found much improved living conditions in Modena, this time in a hotel. Also on April 29, the Fifth Army troops found Milan in the hands of the partisans and learned that they had found and executed Mussolini. Word was received from the Nazis that Hitler died on May 1st. However, not trusting the enemy, there was some skepticism coming from General Eisenhower's headquarters. German forces began to surrender on May 2nd. A total of 83 women served in the 6669 WAC headquarters platoon, 59 original members and 24 replacements. I was in the WAC organization with the Fifth Army, where our services were very much needed in North Africa and Italy. It was an experience of a lifetime. Eunice came back to Wisconsin but did not stay. She moved to Washington, D.C., where she lived for most of the rest of her life. She worked in the Pentagon. She married, had no children, and lived in Towson, Maryland until 1999. In 1995, her husband died, and it was after that she did move back to Wisconsin to be nearer to family. Okay, that's all I have on Eunice. Does anybody have any questions about Eunice Onsrud? Okay, I'll move on to Peg Kellogg. If you think of any, you can chat them in there. Peggy Holla grew up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. She went to nursing school in Chicago and had taken her boards. She was working in Chicago and she tried to enlist in the Nurses Army Corps. The first time she applied, she was turned down due to a slight heart murmur. In March 1944, she tried again to enlist and was accepted. She went to Fort McCoy for training and then to Camp Kilmer in New York. When she first enlisted, she was not given any rank. She was a member of the Red Cross until later when they were made members of the U.S. military. She was then assigned the rank of second lieutenant. The 60th Field Hospital sailed on May 10, 1944, and arrived at Liverpool 8 days later. They were stationed in private homes and told to report daily. Finally, on July 17, 1944, they sailed to Utah Beach in Normandy. Peg stated that the fatalities had been removed before they arrived, and there were very many. Now I'm going to pick up Peg's voice. We followed orders, gave immediate care to the wounded. Then they moved on to a larger hospital with better equipment, and we moved on to more belly and chest wounds as that was our specialty. This was not a MASH hospital. The 60th Field Hospital moved 14 times between the 11th of August and 8th of September. We followed whatever branch of Patton's army needed our techs, officers, and GIs. Landmines were rampant and not visible. One of our doctors was asked to aid a young GI who had lost a leg stepping on a mine. He was waiting in a field for help. The doctor and a young GI ran to help. That young soldier stepped on a mine and was killed. The doctor had shrapnel in his leg. The doctor was from Wisconsin. Eventually, the war ended. 2 doctors borrowed a Jeep and we drove into Munich. What a disaster. We happened on a fenced area that had been labeled Arbeit, which is apparently German for work. We drove in to find the concentration camp Ebensee. There we witnessed some of the horrors of Hitler's Nazis. We were told to leave now when we were found wandering through dirt floor buildings. There were 3 deep pallets of straw with human skeletal bodies on them. This was 10 days after the end of the war, but this particular camp had not been liberated yet. When we drove back to our camp, our orders were ready. At first, it was thought I would have to transfer to the Pacific Theater as I did not have enough points to separate. However, when factoring in my 5 battle stars, Bronze Star, and hospital time, there was enough to come home, and home I came. I married the man I had fallen in love with in Chicago before the war. He himself was home from Guadalcanal and attending the University of Illinois Medical Schools. There were so many incidents, some foggy, some best forgotten. None of my nurse companions are still around. I cannot reminisce. The husband that she married was Lloyd Kellogg. They moved to Oregon. He practiced medicine here for probably 50 years and they lived in Oregon until they passed away. And Peg, with the heart murmur, she lived to be 99. Amongst the other battles Peg was in, two stand out: the Battle of the Hurchin Forest and the Battle of the Bulge. And as a postscript to her memoir, she leaves us with these words: I have pictures of mass graves and crematorium. Certainly sad, but infinitely true. This was no distortion of history. Certainly not a cause of natural war times. If some people wish to bury their heads and the heads of their children in the sand, there are those of us who are witnesses to man's inhumanity to man. Thank you for your time. This is but a fraction of what we have at the library, at the museum, on these ladies and on other participants and other war things. And if you have an interest, please call and make an appointment and come in. We'd love to talk to you. Thanks, Kara.
We did have one question come in, Mary, and that was if this photo that I'm showing on the screen here was taken in Oregon.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
It does.
I think it was probably not taken in Oregon, though, because Peg didn't move to Oregon until after the war. I think this was probably taken in Manitowoc, where she grew up. Eunice grew up 3 miles south of Oregon on Highway 14 on a farm.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh, thank you, Sandra.
Okay, if there's no other questions, my name is Dixie Brown. I'm going to be talking to you this evening about the history of the Oregon schools. In the beginning, Oregon began being settled in the 1830s and 1840s. First, we had many immigrants from New York, Vermont, and Pennsylvania. And soon we had Irish, German, Danish, Norwegian, and other settlers that followed. Before we had schools in the village, rural areas surrounding the village established one-room schools. It was customary for a farmer to deed an acre of land to the school district for a school. Schools were typically named for the donor or something special about the land. Rutland Center was the earliest school opening in 1842. A log cabin was built in 1847 on land donated by David Tipple on the corner of Highway 14 and Oak Hill Road. A frame building was built in 1853, and the school combined with Oak Hill in 1865. Lake Harriet School, which is now a home, is located on the corner of Storytown Road and Sun Valley Parkway and has a bit of claim to fame. During the winter term of 1861 to 1862, John Muir, the famous naturalist, taught at this school. There were numerous rural schools, and most of them closed in the 20s and 30s due to declining enrollments. My first image shows a map of the Oregon Area Historical Society has created to show all the Oregon rural schools in the area. Markers have been placed at all the locations, and several of the buildings are still standing. If you can, I don't know if you can see it, but there's little houses, it looks like, and the ones with flags are buildings that are actually still there. And this map is available at the Oregon Museum if anybody cares to stop by and get one. It would make a nice little driving tour, especially now that we're kind of stuck at home for something fun to do. The next image shows one of our markers. It's just an example of one of the markers that we have. This is of the Jug Prairie School. The next image shows one of our original rural schools called the Dogtown School, which has been moved to the Gary Gorman's property on Wayland Road, and it has been restored. Mr. Gorman and his company were also responsible for renovating the Bred School in 2006 and 2007. I found the Palmer Museum's collection about the Dogtown School, and I wanted to share it with you. It goes like this. The old schoolhouse at Dogtown was built upon a slope The forward's been the motto of those girls and boys who played on the old hillside of Dogtown in sunshine and in shade. From out that happy number, some have joined the heavenly choir, and some have gone across the sea, their country's guns to fire. More have to the city gone, a livelihood to gain, and quite a few among them sign MD to their name. Others till the stubborn soil, their place in life to fill, and proudly watch their children as they play on that old hill. But the Board of Education says the old schoolhouse must go, and a building on level stands 1/2 mile below. And the merry little teacher who now rules on the hill will perhaps take up her studies, a higher place to fill. So forward is our motto, our souls alight with hope. Then in heaven we meet our playmates from that dear old sunny slope. So back then there was a 3-man board that governed the districts. Never in those days was there a woman board member. The board consisted of a director, a moderator, and a treasurer. And the only qualification was to be a man and to be respected by neighbors in the district. The teacher was almost always a single lady and had to be a paragon of virtue. Her typical day went something like this. She rose early, dressed for school, ate breakfast, packed her own lunch, and walked to school whatever the distance. Upon arriving, she carried wood and kindling from the woodshed and built the fire. As the building was warming, she carried in the day's water for drinking and washing hands. The room was tidied, lessons for the day were reviewed, plans and instructions were written on a blackboard. Time was always too short as pupils began to arrive with things to share, questions to be answered, quarrels to be settled, etc. From 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., not one moment could she call her own. During the day, she wore the hats of superintendent, principal, counselor.
Hey, Dixie, could you scoot a little closer to the microphone? It seems to be going in and out a little bit.
Okay.
Try that. Sorry, continue.
Okay, sorry. During the day, she wore the hats of superintendent, principal, counselor, teacher, coach, nurse, janitor, referee, babysitter, and others. Decisions to be made were her own. There was no one to help or advise her, and no telephone to call for help if she needed it. Even during recess, she was on duty. When the last child left, she most likely drew a sigh of relief, picked up her room, did the sweeping, checked the building and grounds, began planning for the next day's lesson load, and loaded down with big piles of paper to correct. Finally, as the sun was setting low in the sky, she trudged her weary way toward her boarding home, all for about $10 a month. Once married, they could no longer teach. Their social lives were very restricted. They were not allowed to keep company with men. They had to be home between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. And they weren't allowed to loiter downtown or at ice cream parlors. The rural school was the center of the social life of the district. Excuse me. The school mom was not considered worth her salt unless she could produce a good Christmas program. The teacher was also expected to put on 1 or 2 all-district spelling bees throughout the year and a couple of box socials. Students were also held to a good moral conduct. Education was not guaranteed. You had to be of good moral character. In 1867 and 68, the first permanent school was built in the village, and that's what we see here. It was on North Main Street, about where the driveway to the school is now. The school structure was 2 stories, and eventually the 2 one-story wings were added on both sides. All 8 grades attended the school. High school began to be offered later, and at first it was for 3 years, and then it expanded to 4. The first high school graduating class was in 1884 and consisted of 4 students: Charles McWilliams, Arthur Schultz, Fanny Crump, and John Holmes Martin. So what happened to the original school? If you look at the next slide, it shows that the center section was moved downtown to the land near where Maria's was. It was used as a village hall and a fire station. Eventually, it was moved to the space now occupied by the village hall and it remained in use as a village hall until it was torn down to build a new one in 1941. The two side sections were moved to the 400 block of North Main Street and are still used today as residential homes. So if you ever want to look, 414 and 418 North Main Street are where those ended up. The original owners were Pat Cusick and Emmett Fincher. The village continued to grow and more school space was needed. In 1895, a yellow brick school was built, and that's on the next slide. This is how it looked, and the cost was $11,588.37. The yellow brick school was a large two-story building with an attic. Originally, there were 3 classrooms. Eventually, the attic was also put to use as a school district grew, and it could hold 305 students. All 12 grades were held at the school. The first classes were 224 pupils and 6 teachers. That's approximately 38 students per teacher. Students bought their own books back then, and that was continued until the 1940s. By 1898, the number of students had shrunk some to 190, with 60 of them being high school students. The library had 500 books. The classes were divided 2 grades to a room and each teacher 2 levels. Kindergarten was added in 1912. This building stood where the Netherwood Knoll Grade School is today, and it served as a school until 1966 when it was demolished for a new building. The next image shows the building behind the new school. So you'll see the yellow brick building in the background of the new school. The next image, in 1922, it appeared that the increase in school population was becoming a factor, so a new state-of-the-art red brick school was built. The cost was about $75,000 plus $6,000 in equipment. Originally, the red brick school housed the high school and the yellow brick, the grade school. The red brick school had 4 teachers and 1 principal for a student body of 106. As the grade school population increased, the kindergarten and the junior high were moved to the red brick. As the rural schools closed, more students came to the village schools, and in 1947, an integration plan went into effect, reorganizing the school district and implementing a 5-member school board. By 1950, 707 students were enrolled in the Oregon School District. For comparison, today's enrollment is a little over 4,000 students with 650 teachers. That's about 1 teacher for every 7 students. The school also became a community center for social activities. The basketball team moved from Kronk's Opera House and the bicycle factory to the new gymnasium. Graduation ceremonies, band and orchestra concerts, class plays, large community productions, and proms took place also at the school. It served as high school until the mid-1960s, when it was used as part of the elementary school until 1993, after which it was used for storage. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1998. In 2006 to 2007, the Gorman Company purchased and renovated the building. It became their corporate headquarters in 2008. On the next slide is a picture that I took this winter. I just happened to be out walking, and there was a full moon over the red brick building, and I just took a shot, and I just thought it's kind of become such a source of pride, you know, that we were able to keep such a historic building. In 1962, due to closing of rural schools and population growth, Brooklyn joined the Oregon School District. Oregon School District ranks among the top of Dane County schools, and the community growth in part is due to our education excellence. And the next slides are just going to show maybe current Oregon schools. The Oregon High School was built in 1966. The next slide is the Brooklyn Elementary School, built around 1961. And then Netherwood Knoll, and I was not able to find what year that was built. And as well as Prairie View Elementary School, I couldn't find that either. And we have the new school, the Forest Edge Elementary School. I don't know if anyone's been driven by there, but it's really long. I was trying to take a landscape picture and it wouldn't even fit on my phone, my camera. But it's a beautiful setting out there. It's very beautiful. And then the last school, I believe, is the Oregon Middle School. Oh, Rome Corners is next. And then the last one is the Oregon Middle School. And that one was built in 1993. That's all I have for my presentation. I see that there was quite a few questions, it looked like, in the chat.
Yeah, I'll go through. So the first one, who would build the schools? You mentioned that a landowner would donate land, but who was responsible for building the school?
My guess is that the people got together and built them. I'm not sure though. I don't know. Anyone else know for sure? Joanne, do you know?
I was on mute, I'm sorry. I don't know for sure, but I think probably the owners of the property played a big part in building the schools as well. And they often had the schools named after them, I think for that reason too, because they donated the land, they helped build it.
Mhm.
But like you, that's just what I suppose to be the case.
Okay, next question from Russell. Any idea when men would become teachers?
That's no.
I think it was
don't have-
late. I think it was late. Don't you think, Pat?
Well,
Like,
John Muir taught at one school, and that was in back in
that's true.
the 1800s. So I don't think it was always the case that it was a woman.
Okay. When did the pieces of the building move to North Main Street?
I'm trying to think if that was on that picture. I think it just says building on the move, but I don't know if it has a date.
No, it doesn't. It just says Old Town Hall on the move.
Let's see. I'm just trying to see if there's a date.
We can follow up on that
Yeah,
one.
I think we'll have to.
Yeah, great question. So another question, what happened to the bell at the top of the moved school?
That's a really good question. I have no
Yeah?
idea.
We'll have
I
to
wish
look
I
into
knew.
this.
That would be a good thing to have.
Yeah. And then the last questions are the property owners that have old school buildings on their property, like the one at Fitrona and Highway M, responsible for keeping the building up.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, he keeps it up, and I think that he's even willing to, if you ask for permission to show the school to people, the Dogtown School.
So that was all
You're
the
welcome.
questions that came in during the presentation. Were there any other questions before we start on our next one?
Oh.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Joanne. Or
Okay.
yeah,
Uh,
sorry.
Yes, it's Joanne, and I'm the final act here. So bear with me. This is the time that potential spam usually calls me, and I do have a dog in the kitchen that probably wants some attention too. So I may be distracted, but we'll get through it.
Very good.
So my name is Joanne Swenson. I have lived in Oregon virtually all my life, for maybe the exception of a couple of years when I lived in Madison. But after I retired from working, I became a volunteer at the Oregon Area Historical Society, and having worked in Oregon for a number of years, I was familiar with a lot of the people's names and places. But until I got to doing a lot of research, it was really interesting to learn what went on in the years before. So I was really interested in doing the research and coming upon the Waterman Park. I had the thought that it really would have been nice if I was born into the Waterman family, because they actually owned quite a bit of land in this area back in the day. But I'm sure most of you probably know where Waterman Park is located in downtown Oregon. And from its central location in downtown Oregon, one can view the iconic World War I monument. The monument itself has a story of its own that we hope to tell. But looking beyond the monument, you will see the South Main Street Historic District, where the McDermott Building, the Connor Building stand there on the corner. The building that once was the Marvin Drug Store with the Oregon Masonic Lodge occupying its upstairs. And you can still see the emblem of the Masonic Lodge near the top of that building yet today. You can also see the present Masonic Lodge if you're sitting in the Waterman Park. If you look off to the north and slightly to the east, it's on the corner there. So it is in a very central location. The Village Hall is right next door. And as a child, I went to first and second grade in the Village Hall. And we used to have our recesses in the park. Off to the left or to the south, you look and you see the Tin Man, the water tower that at one time was considered ripe for demolition, but it survived, and with its amazing restoration now serves as a beacon, shining in the evening darkness. Below it is the refurbished pump house. But as with many of these places, the Waterman Park has its own unique and interesting history of its own. So we'll go back in time to a man named Charles Waterman. He was born on October 13th, 1822 in Orleans County, Vermont, to Jonathan and Sarah, also known as Sally Waterman. Afterward, he resided in Springfield, Massachusetts, and in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, where he was in business. He married Elvina Chaffee in Massachusetts. They had 3 children. One child, Eliza, was born and died in 1848 in Windsor Locks in Oregon. They also raised a nephew, Justin Spalding Waterman Jr. Charles came to Oregon in 1849. It's not documented on the mode of travel he took to arrive in Wisconsin. Most likely, it was a combination of rail and wagon, as was the case when his brother Elias Waterman came to Rutland in 1850. Charles purchased a 200-acre farm. The first survey for a village plat was made in 1857 under his direction and on part of his land. For reference, the present village of Oregon was entered from the government in the early 1840s. The first 40 acres was purchased for $1.25 an acre. And that was by I.M. Bennett. Mr. Bennett later sold it to James Koval for $100, making a little bit of a profit there. Mr. Koval built a log cabin, which would be on the lawn of the present red brick building. He had the first shoe shop in the village. The 40 acres was sold again to Charles Waterman for around $600. And it's in the oldest part of the village of Oregon. This section runs east of the Methodist Church and North Main Street down to about Maria's Pizza was located, and east to about State Street, and also ran off into the marsh to the east. Charles Waterman gave the Presbyterian Church the land upon which the early church and house were built in 1856. And on slide 25, Kara, for a period of about 2 years, Mr. Waterman ran the Exchange Hotel. It was built, though, in 1854 on the south side of the square. The business failed, and the hotel was then purchased by Richard Chandler and became known as the Chandler Hotel. It was a booming business at that time, but in 1885, the hotel burned down, and later in 1898, Charles Netherwood built the present Netherwood Block, where we see Senior Peppers and the Murphy Dental Office, for instance. In 1860 and 61, Charles Waterman was in the mercantile business. And in 1862 and 63, he was a contractor in grading the CNN railroad line from Oregon to Madison. The next three slides, 26, 27, and 28 for you, Kara. Charles Waterman built a house approximately where the post office is located. By these pictures, we can see that the post office in the next slide, just off to the south, or a post office just to the, yeah, that would be on the south side of the house, and the Masonic Lodge on the opposite side. And the Masonic Lodge is still in that location. There was a spring near the barn, and due to the nearness of the Badfish Creek, they occasionally had an uninvited fish that would drop by. At one time, there were brook trout in the creek. Charles Waterman began a livery business in 1874, and he continued that to 1880 when he sold it to Powers and Fisher. The remainder of his business career was devoted to farming. With an abundance of land at his disposal, in May 1860, Charles Waterman sold the site on North Main Street on which the first school was built. And that was basically what Dixie was referring to, that house with the 3 sections to it. And he sold it for $20. Not a bad deal. Charles Waterman also gave the park across on the next slide. I'm sorry, Kara. On the next slide, he also gave the park across from his house to the village. Over the years, it's been whittled down to its present size. A 2-story, I got the wrong slide up there, I'm sorry. We'll get to that. There you
Is this
go.
the right one?
I'm looking for the one with the park. I thought it was 29. Yeah, keep going. There you go. So he gave the park across from his house to the village. Over the years, it has been whittled down to its present size. It was much larger at the beginning. Upstairs, the village band played concerts every Wednesday night during the summer. And downstairs, churches and other organizations held ice cream socials. Ice cream cones were sold for 5 cents. Pie and cake for 10 cents. You could get that a la mode for 15 cents. If not for the prices of the ice cream social, it sounds a bit like what we have our ice cream social held today in the park. Free movies were held on Saturday nights during the 40s. They were sponsored by local merchants. That's something I would like to see revisited. At one time, there were many more trees in the park. Several were sacrificed for additional parking space. The gazebo was eventually replaced with a larger band shell. The Oregon Community Band performs there in the summer months. Let's try, there you go. The earlier cannon was a field gun built in 1918. This one is the newer one, but the older one was, there you go, was sent for a scrap metal drive during World War II. It was later replaced with another World War II cannon, which was the next slide. Charles began the livery business in June of 1874, and he continued to August 1880, and he sold that to Powers and Fisher. Charles also held the position of Justice of the Peace and Collector, and for 6 years was Deputy Sheriff of Dane County. During his time as Deputy Sheriff, he was shot and seriously wounded by a horse thief that he was trying to apprehend. So we turn to Justin Spalding Waterman Jr. at this point. Justin Spalding Waterman Jr. was born in Connecticut. In November 1852, he was the only child of Justin S. Waterman Sr. and his wife Clara Sugden Waterman. Justin's parents died when he was but 4 years old. He came west with an aunt via rail, canal, and lakes to Shakopee, Minnesota. It was there in the 1860s that, along with his aunt and family, they and others fled to Fort Snelling to escape an Indian massacre. Soon after, his uncle in Oregon, that would be Charles, provided ways to bring them to Oregon, and Justin was raised then by his uncle Charles. At the age of 19, he started a life for himself. He began in the business of buying and shipping livestock, and he followed that trade very successfully for a period of 16 years. Let's try slides 31, 32. I'm sorry, we're a little out of order, I think. I'll continue with Justin. Since 1889, he devoted his attention almost exclusively to farming and stock raising. He raised a great many blooded horses and shipped stallions to all parts of the United States. The German coach stallions were his specialty. Upon Charles Waterman's death, his nephew Justin inherited his property. Justin married Anna T. Osborne on April 27, 1873. They had no children. Annie Waterman was heralded as a true, kind, and loving wife and an unselfish woman. Her home extended a cordial welcome to all. She died at the age of 64. In an eulogy at her funeral, it was said that she is gone, but she will never be forgotten. And as was the case, the park was later dedicated in 1924 and named in her memory, the Anna Osborne Waterman Park. It was to be sufficiently endowed to make it one of the beauty spots of the village. Tara, if we can go to the last slides, 34, I think, or 37, just showing you the park today and some of the events that take place and activities that take place now in the park. Our ice cream social, along with the band concerts in the summer, are always a big crowd pleaser and attract many people. There was a Flag Day ceremony, various military, there's the Flag Day ceremony, and other events like picnics and other gatherings. I think the senior center has used it for some of the Aging on Council has had meetings where they've brought people to the park and so forth. So it's widely used and a very popular spot in the village of Oregon. And we're glad to have what is left of it there. I wish there was a little bit more of it. I can remember when I went to school that it was quite a large area there that we could go over and have our recess in. So that's the conclusion of my presentation on the Waterman Park. And I'm sorry that we kind of got the slides mixed up there. I thought I had the right numbers associated with it, but.
Okay, yeah, so we do have a couple questions.
Sure.
Any idea why there were no stipulations stating the Waterman donated parkland needed to remain parkland?
There was. It was supposed to be endowed so that it would always be for a recreational area. Somewhere along the line, I believe it didn't get registered. And it did revert back to the property, to the Waterman property. So I assume that at that point, whatever they had donated to the village still became the property of the village.
Well, that was the only question that came in.
Okay.
So do we have any other questions? Do we have any questions for any of the panelists? I'm going to stop the sharing here. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. I want to take this time to thank Dina and Mary, Dixie, and Joanne for their time and efforts and putting all this together, sharing their knowledge with all of us here. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. It looks like the participants here are saying thank you as well in the chat. So that is all that we have scheduled for tonight. Again, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you to everybody who came tonight. Have a great evening.
Thanks for hosting, Kara.